The blood had already dried in the dark crescents under her fingernails. When Natalie Harper stumbled into the dusty main street of Montana City, Montana, her wrists screaming with every movement as the rope burns scraped against the fabric of her torn sleeves. It was July of 1878, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small mining town nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, turning the dirt road into a shimmering haze that made her vision swim even more than the dehydration already had. She had been walking for 2 days straight, maybe 3. She had lost count after the first night, when she finally managed to work her hands free from the bindings her husband had tied so brutally tight before he locked her in that cellar. The world tilted sideways, and Natalie felt her knees buckle, felt the ground rushing up to meet her face. But strong hands caught her before she hit the dirt. Through the fog of exhaustion and pain, she saw a man's face swimming into focus above her, all hard angles and sun-weathered skin, with eyes the color of whiskey and firelight, that looked at her with concern, but not questions. He was tall, she realized dimly, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and a jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. His shirt was dusty from the trail, and he smelled like horses and leather, and something else, something clean, like sage after rain. "Easy now," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow cut through the ringing in her ears. "I have got you." Natalie tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. Her tongue felt like it had been coated in sand, and all that came out was a rasping sound that barely qualified as human. The man's expression tightened, and he shifted his grip on her, one arm sliding under her knees as he lifted her easily against his chest. She should have protested, should have told him she could walk on her own, but the truth was, she could not, and the relief of being held, of having someone else carry the weight for just a moment, was so overwhelming that tears pricked at her eyes. "The doctor is just up the street," the man said, already moving with long strides that somehow managed to keep her steady despite his pace. "You are going to be all right." Natalie wanted to tell him that she would never be all right again, that nothing had been all right for 3 years now, not since the day she married Richard Harper in a small ceremony back in Ohio, and discovered too late what kind of monster hid behind his charming smile. But she said nothing, just let her head rest against this stranger's shoulder, and tried to remember when the last time was that someone had touched her with gentleness instead of rage. The doctor's office was blessedly cool after the heat of the street, and the man carried her inside with the ease of someone who had hauled far heavier loads across far greater distances. An older gentleman with wire-rimmed spectacles looked up from his desk, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. "Thomas, what have you brought me now?" the doctor asked, already rising and gesturing toward an examination table covered with a clean white sheet. "Found her collapsing in the street," Thomas replied, and Natalie filed away his name in the part of her mind that was still functioning. Thomas. It suited him somehow. "She needs water first, I think. She looks like she has been in the sun too long." The doctor nodded and moved to fill a cup from a pitcher on the side table, while Thomas gently lowered Natalie onto the examination table. His hands lingered for just a moment, making sure she was steady before he stepped back, and Natalie found herself missing the solid warmth of his presence immediately. The doctor pressed the cup to her lips, and she drank greedily, ignoring the way the water dribbled down her chin in her desperation. "Slowly," the doctor cautioned. "Too fast, and you will make yourself sick." Natalie forced herself to take smaller sips, even though every cell in her body was screaming for more. When the cup was finally empty, the doctor set it aside and began his examination, his practiced hands gentle but thorough. He listened to her heart, looked in her eyes, asked her simple questions that she managed to answer in a voice that sounded nothing like her own. But when his fingers accidentally brushed against her wrists, Natalie could not suppress the sharp gasp of pain that escaped her. The doctor's expression changed immediately, becoming more focused, more serious. "May I see your wrists, miss?" Natalie hesitated, her heart suddenly pounding so hard she was sure they could both hear it. Showing her wrists meant showing what had been done to her, meant opening herself up to questions she was not ready to answer, meant admitting that she had been weak enough to let someone hurt her this badly. But the pain was constant and terrible, and she knew that infection was a real possibility if the wounds were not treated properly. Slowly, reluctantly, she extended her arms. The doctor made a soft sound of dismay as he pushed up her sleeves, revealing the angry red burns that encircled both wrists like grotesque bracelets. The skin was raw and weeping in places, and Natalie could see Thomas's jaw tighten from where he stood near the door. But true to the quiet strength she had already sensed in him, he said nothing, asked nothing, just watched with those steady amber eyes as the doctor began cleaning the wounds with gentle efficiency. "These are rope burns," the doctor said quietly, not quite making it a question. "Fresh ones, too. No more than a few days old, I would say." Natalie said nothing, just stared at the ceiling and tried not to flinch every time the cloth touched her raw skin. The doctor worked in silence for a few moments, then glanced over his shoulder at Thomas. "I need to step out to mix a salve for these wounds," he said. "It will take me perhaps 10 minutes. Thomas, would you mind staying with the young lady? I do not think she should be left alone just now." Thomas nodded without hesitation. "Of course." The doctor squeezed Natalie's shoulder gently before disappearing through a door at the back of the office, leaving her alone with this stranger who had caught her when she fell. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable, but not threatening either, just a space waiting to be filled with words neither of them seemed ready to speak. "I am going to finish cleaning these for you," Thomas said finally, moving to take the doctor's place beside the examination table. He picked up the cloth and the basin of clean water, his movements careful and deliberate. "If I hurt you, you tell me, all right?" Natalie nodded, not trusting her voice. Thomas dipped the cloth in the water and wrung it out, then began dabbing at her left wrist with a gentleness that seemed almost impossible for hands that large. He worked in silence, his brow furrowed in concentration, and Natalie found herself studying his face. He was handsome in a rugged way, probably somewhere in his late 20s, with the kind of tan that came from years spent outdoors. There was a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow, and another along his jaw that she had not noticed before. "Thank you," she whispered, the words scraping past the tightness in her throat, "for catching me, for bringing me here." Thomas glanced up at her, and something in his expression softened. "No need to thank me. Could not very well let you hit the ground, could I? Some men would have. Then they are not men worth knowing." He said it simply, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world, and Natalie felt something crack open in her chest. She had spent 3 years with a man who had promised to love and protect her, who had instead made her life a waking nightmare of violence and control, and here was this stranger treating her with more kindness in 10 minutes than Richard had shown her in all their married life. It was almost too much to bear. "Where did you come from?" Thomas asked, his voice still gentle as he moved to her right wrist. "Montana City is not exactly on the way to anywhere." "Ohio," Natalie said, because it was easier than explaining everything else. "Originally anyway. I have been traveling for a while now. Long way to come on foot. I did not walk the whole way. There was a wagon train for most of it. And then there was not." Thomas nodded, accepting this non-explanation without pushing for more. "You have family here? Someone who will be expecting you?" "No, no one. Running from something then." It was not a question, just an observation stated in that same matter-of-fact tone, and Natalie found she could not bring herself to deny it. "Yes." "All right," Thomas said, and that was all. He did not ask what she was running from, did not demand details or explanations, just acknowledged the truth and kept working on her wrists with steady, careful hands. When the doctor returned with a pot of sweet-smelling salve, Thomas stepped back without a word and let the older man take over, but he did not leave. He stayed by the door, a quiet presence that Natalie found herself drawing strength from, even though she barely knew him. The doctor applied the salve with practiced efficiency, then began wrapping her wrists in clean white bandages. "These need to be changed twice a day," he instructed. "Morning and evening. Keep them clean and dry. If you see any signs of infection, redness spreading, fever, anything like that, you come back immediately. Understood?" "Yes," Natalie said. "Thank you, doctor." "You have a place to stay?" the doctor asked, and Natalie felt her stomach sink. In her desperation to get away, to put distance between herself and Richard, she had not thought much beyond just surviving. She had no money, no belongings except the clothes on her back, no plan beyond running until she could not run anymore. "I will find something," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The doctor and Thomas exchanged a look that Natalie could not quite interpret. Then Thomas cleared his throat. "The boarding house on 3rd Street takes in women. Mrs. Patterson, who runs it, is decent folk. I could take you there, introduce you proper-like." "I do not have money for a boarding house," Natalie admitted, her cheeks burning with shame. Mrs. Patterson is always looking for help, Thomas said. Cooking, cleaning, mending. She might be willing to give you a room in exchange for work. It was charity, Natalie knew, but she was in no position to refuse it. She nodded slowly. That would be very kind. Thank you. The doctor helped her down from the examination table, and Thomas stepped forward immediately, offering his arm for support. Natalie hesitated only a moment before taking it and felt the solid strength of him through the fabric of his shirt. They made their way out into the late afternoon sun, Thomas matching his longer stride to her slower pace without complaint. Montana City was not a large town, maybe a few hundred people at most, with a main street lined with the usual establishments. A general store, a saloon, a church with a white steeple that gleamed in the sunshine. The buildings were mostly wood construction, built quickly during the mining boom that had brought people flooding into Montana territory a decade earlier. Now, the easy gold was gone, and only the stubborn remained, eking out a living from the land in whatever way they could. Thomas led her down 3rd Street to a tidy 2-story house, painted a cheerful yellow with white trim. A sign hanging from the porch proclaimed it to be Patterson's boarding house for ladies, and through the open windows, Natalie could hear the sound of women's voices and the clatter of dishes. Thomas climbed the porch steps and knocked firmly on the doorframe, and a moment later, a round-faced woman with gray-streaked hair appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. "Thomas Porter," she said warmly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Afternoon, Mrs. Patterson," Thomas replied, touching the brim of his hat. "I was hoping you might have a room available. This is Miss Natalie Harper. She just arrived in town and is looking for work and a place to stay." Mrs. Patterson's sharp eyes took in Natalie's disheveled appearance, the bandages on her wrists, the hollow look that Natalie knew must be written all over her face. But whatever she thought, she kept it to herself. "I might have something," she said slowly. "Can you cook, girl?" "Yes, madam," Natalie said. "And clean and sew, whatever you need." Well, I suppose we could work something out. Lord knows I could use the help with the evening meal. Come on in, and we will discuss terms." Relief flooded through Natalie so intensely it made her dizzy. She turned to Thomas, searching for words adequate to express her gratitude and finding none. "Thank you," she said finally, "for everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not been there." "You would have figured something out," Thomas said, and he said it with such conviction that Natalie almost believed him. "You have the look of a survivor about you." He tipped his hat to both women and turned to leave, but Natalie found herself reaching out without thinking, her bandaged hand catching his sleeve. Thomas stopped immediately, looking back at her with a question in his eyes. "Will I see you again?" Natalie asked, and felt her cheeks heat at how desperate she sounded. Something shifted in Thomas's expression, something warm and almost pleased. "Montana City is not a very big place," he said. "I expect our paths will cross again soon enough." Then he was gone, his boots making hollow sounds on the wooden porch steps as he descended. Natalie watched him walk away until Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat pointedly, and she turned to follow the older woman inside with one last glance over her shoulder. The inside of the boarding house was cozy and well kept, with embroidered samplers on the walls and curtains at every window. Mrs. Patterson led her through a sitting room where 2 young women looked up from their sewing with undisguised curiosity, down a hallway to a small kitchen that smelled like bread and chicken stew. She gestured for Natalie to sit at the worn wooden table, and then poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot on the stove. "Now then," Mrs. Patterson said, settling into the chair across from Natalie. "Let us talk plainly. You are clearly in some kind of trouble, running from something or someone. I do not need to know the details, but I do need to know if whatever you are running from is going to show up on my doorstep causing problems." Natalie wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. "I do not think so," she said carefully. "I came a long way, and I was careful. No one knows where I went." "Your husband?" Natalie's head jerked up in surprise, and Mrs. Patterson smiled sadly. "Child, I have been running this boarding house for 15 years. I have seen more than my share of women with that same haunted look in their eyes. The bandages on your wrists just confirm what I already suspected." Tears burned in Natalie's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "Yes, my husband. But he does not know where I am. He thinks I am dead." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose. "Dead?" "There was a fire," Natalie said. the lie coming easier than she expected. At the house where he locked me in the cellar. I managed to get out, but he was not home. As far as he knows, I burned with the house. It was not entirely a lie. There had been a fire, though Natalie had said it herself, a desperate gambit to cover her escape. She had waited until Richard left for his weekly card game, then broke the lamp in the cellar and let the oil spread across the old wooden floor. The flames had caught quickly, too quickly, and she had barely made it out before the whole structure was engulfed. She had watched from the tree line as the house burned, feeling nothing but a wild, terrible relief. "Well, Mrs.," Patterson said after a long moment, "I cannot say I approve of lying, but I also cannot say I blame you. A woman does what she must to survive." She stood and refilled both coffee cups. "Here is what I can offer. You will have a room on the second floor, small but private. In exchange, you will help with cooking, cleaning, laundry, whatever needs doing. I will provide 3 meals a day and a small allowance for personal necessities. You can stay as long as you need, provided you pull your weight. Does that sound acceptable?" "More than acceptable," Natalie said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. You do not know what this means to me." "I think I have a pretty good idea," the older woman said gently. "Now, finish your coffee and I will show you to your room. Then you can wash up and rest before dinner. You look like you have not slept properly in days." The room Mrs. Patterson showed her to was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow bed, washstand, and chest of drawers it contained. But to Natalie, it looked like paradise. There was a window overlooking the street, curtains that could be drawn for privacy, a door with a lock on the inside. Most importantly, it was hers, a space where no one could hurt her, where she could finally breathe without fear. Mrs. Patterson left her with a pitcher of warm water, clean towels, and a promise that dinner would be in 2 hours. Natalie locked the door behind her and stood in the center of the small room, letting the reality of what she had done sink in. She had escaped. She had run 3 territories away, had walked until her feet bled, had survived on creek water and whatever berries she could find, and she had made it. She was free. The tears came then, hot and fierce, and Natalie sank onto the bed and let herself cry for the first time since she had fled. She cried for the girl she had been when she married Richard, so naive and trusting. She cried for the 3 years of hell that followed, for every bruise and broken bone, for every time she had begged him to stop, and he had just smiled and hit her harder. And she cried with relief that it was over, that she never had to see his face again, that she could start building a new life in this small Montana town where no one knew her story. Eventually the tears subsided, and Natalie forced herself to stand. She washed her face and hands carefully, mindful of her bandaged wrists, and tried to do something with her hair. It was a hopeless task without a proper brush, but she managed to work out the worst of the tangles with her fingers and braid it into something resembling neatness. Her dress was filthy and torn beyond repair, but it was all she had. She would need to find fabric and make a new one soon, add it to the growing list of things she needed to rebuild her life from nothing. Dinner was a lively affair, with all 6 of the boarding house residents gathered around the table in the dining room. Besides Natalie, there were the 2 young women she had seen earlier, sisters named Mary and Clara, who worked as seamstresses. There was an older widow named Mrs. Chen, who worked at the general store, a schoolteacher called Miss Williams, who could not have been more than 25, and a woman about Natalie's own age named Sarah, who helped her father run the local newspaper. They were all curious about Natalie, of course, but Mrs. Patterson had clearly briefed them on what questions were and were not acceptable. They kept the conversation light, telling her about the town and its inhabitants, sharing gossip and news in a way that made Natalie feel almost normal, almost like she was just a newcomer making friends instead of a woman running for her life. "Thomas Porter is a good man," Sarah said when the conversation turned to how Natalie had come to be at the boarding house. "He and his brother own a ranch about 10 miles north of here. They supply most of the beef for the territory." "Just him and his brother?" Natalie asked, trying to sound casual. "Well, they have ranch hands, of course," Sarah clarified. "But yes, just the 2 of them running things. Their parents died 5 years back, cholera epidemic. Thomas was barely 23, but he stepped up and kept the ranch going. His brother James helps, but everyone knows Thomas is the real force behind it all." "He seems very kind," Natalie offered, and felt her cheeks heat when several of the women exchanged knowing looks. "He is, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "One of the best men in this town, and I do not say that lightly. You could do worse than having him as a friend, Natalie." Natalie said nothing, just focused on her plate and tried not to think about the way Thomas's hands had felt when he bandaged her wrists, gentle and sure, and careful not to cause more pain. She barely knew him. It was ridiculous to feel this pull toward a stranger, this sense that somehow he mattered in a way she could not yet explain. She was here to rebuild her life, to find safety and independence, not to fall for the first man who showed her kindness. But late that night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the boarding house settling around her, Natalie could not stop thinking about Thomas Porter, about the way he had caught her when she fell, the way he had carried her so carefully, the way he had bandaged her wrists and never once asked how she got those rope burns. Most men would have demanded answers, would have felt entitled to her story, but Thomas had simply helped and let her keep her secrets. In the darkness, Natalie touched her bandaged wrists and made herself a promise. Whatever happened next, whoever she became in this new life, she would never again let herself be vulnerable the way she had been with Richard. She would be strong and self-sufficient and need no one. It was the only way to survive. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Natalie woke early each morning and helped Mrs. Patterson prepare breakfast for the boarding house residents. Then she spent her mornings cleaning rooms, doing laundry, mending linens. Afternoons were for marketing and meal preparation, evenings for serving dinner and cleaning up afterward. It was hard work, but honest work, and Natalie found she did not mind the exhaustion that sent her to bed each night. It was so much better than the alternative. Her wrists healed slowly, the angry red burns fading to pink and then to white scars that she knew would never fully disappear. She changed the bandages herself now, twice daily as the doctor had instructed, and tried not to think too much about what those scars represented. They were part of her now, a permanent reminder of what she had survived, and she would learn to live with them. She saw Thomas around town occasionally over those first few weeks. He would tip his hat when their paths crossed, ask how she was settling in, exchange a few words of pleasant conversation. But he never pushed for more, never tried to insert himself into her life or demand her attention. And Natalie found herself both grateful and oddly disappointed by his restraint. It was a Saturday afternoon in early August when everything changed. Natalie had been sent to the general store to purchase flour and sugar, and she was walking back to the boarding house with her packages when she heard raised voices coming from the alley between the feed store and the blacksmith. She probably should have kept walking, minded her own business the way she had learned to do in her marriage, but something about one of the voices made her stop. She peered around the corner of the building and felt her blood run cold. There were 3 men in the alley, 2 of them locals she recognized from church, and they had a third man cornered against the wall. The man was Chinese, probably one of the workers from the laundry on 5th Street, and from the way he was holding his side, Natalie could tell he had already been hit at least once. "We do not want your kind here," one of the locals was saying, his voice ugly with hate. "You and your people need to go back where you came from." "I am leaving," the Chinese man said, his English heavily accented but clear. "I do not want trouble." "Too late for that," the second local said, and drew back his fist. "Stop it!" The words were out of Natalie's mouth before she could think better of it, loud and sharp in the quiet afternoon. All 3 men turned to stare at her, and Natalie felt her courage waver, but she forced herself to step into the alley anyway, her packages clutched tight against her chest. "Leave him alone," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He has done nothing to you." "This is not your concern, lady," the first man said dismissively. "Go on about your business." "I will not," Natalie said, and was surprised to find she meant it. She had spent 3 years being silent, being compliant, letting terrible things happen because she was too afraid to speak up. She would not do it anymore. "You are 3 against 1, and he is not fighting back. That makes you bullies and cowards." The second man's face went red with anger. "You want to watch your mouth, woman, unless you want what he is getting." "Try it," said a new voice, low and dangerous, and Natalie's heart leaped as Thomas Porter stepped into the alley behind her. "Go ahead, put your hands on her, see what happens." The change in the 2 locals was immediate and dramatic. They stepped back from the Chinese man, their postures shifting from aggressive to defensive. "We were just having a conversation, Thomas," the first man said, but his voice had lost its edge. No harm done. "Did not look like conversation to me," Thomas said. He moved to stand beside Natalie, his presence solid and reassuring. Looked like two men beating on someone who could not fight back. That about right, Mr. Wong? The Chinese man nodded, still holding his side. They said I should leave town. They said they would make me. I see. Thomas's voice had gone very quiet, which somehow made him seem even more dangerous. Well, gentlemen, I have a different suggestion. You are going to apologize to Mr. Wong. Then you are going to leave, and you are not going to bother him or anyone else from the Chinese community again. Because if I hear that you have, if I so much as catch wind of you causing trouble, I am going to make you very, very sorry. We clear? The two men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options and not liking what they found. Thomas Porter might only be one man, but he was well respected in Montana City. His ranch employed a dozen men, and his word carried weight. After a long moment, they both mumbled apologies that might have been sincere, if not for the resentment in their voices, then hurried out of the alley. Thomas watched them go before turning to Mr. Wong. You all right? Need to see the doctor? I am fine, Mr. Wong said, though he was still wincing. Thank you, Mr. Porter. And thank you, miss. That was very brave. Or very foolish, Thomas said. But there was something almost like approval in his voice. He looked at Natalie, really looked at her, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks under the intensity of his gaze. You realize they could have hurt you. I know, Natalie said. But I could not just walk away, not when I could help. Something in Thomas's expression softened. No, he said quietly. I suppose you could not. He offered his arm. Come on, I will walk you back to the boarding house. They said goodbye to Mr. Wong and made their way out of the alley. Thomas carried Natalie's packages despite her protests, and they walked in comfortable silence for a block before he spoke again. That was a dangerous thing you did back there, he said, standing up for Mr. Wong. Not everyone in this town is going to like it. I do not care, Natalie said, and realized it was true. I have spent too long being afraid, keeping quiet when I should have spoken up. I am done with that. Thomas glanced at her, something like understanding in his eyes. The rope burns, he said. That is what you were running from, is it not? Someone who wanted to keep you quiet. Natalie's breath caught. They had never discussed her wrists, not beyond that first day at the doctor's office. Yes, she said finally. Someone who thought he owned me, who thought he could control me with fear and pain. But he could not. In the end, no. In the end, I found a way out. They had reached the boarding house, but Thomas made no move to leave. He set down the packages on the porch steps and turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Natalie, he said, and it was the first time he had used her first name. I do not know what you went through before you came here, and I would not presume to ask. But I want you to know something. You are safe in Montana City. And if whoever hurt you ever shows up here, if you ever need help, any kind of help at all, you come find me. Understood? Natalie felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. Why? She whispered. Why do you care? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was rough with emotion. Because from the moment I caught you in the street, from the first time I looked into your eyes, I knew you were someone worth protecting, someone worth knowing. And because I have a feeling that, given half a chance, you are going to do extraordinary things in this town, Natalie Harper. He tipped his hat, collected his horse from where it was tied nearby, and rode away before Natalie could find words to respond. She stood on the porch steps, her heart pounding, her mind reeling, and tried to process what had just happened. Thomas Porter barely knew her, had no reason to care about her beyond common decency, and yet he had just promised to protect her, had just told her she mattered. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Over the weeks that followed, Natalie found herself seeing more of Thomas. Not by accident, she suspected, though he never made his intentions obvious. He would happen to be in town when she was marketing, would offer to carry her packages. He would stop by the boarding house to deliver beef from Mrs. Patterson's kitchen and somehow always have time to sit and talk for a few minutes. He told her about his ranch, about growing up in Montana territory, about his plans to expand the herd next spring. And slowly, carefully, Natalie began to share pieces of her own story. She told him about growing up in Ohio, about her parents dying of influenza when she was 17, about meeting Richard Harper at church and thinking he was her salvation. She did not tell him everything, could not bear to speak of the worst things that Richard had done, but she told him enough that Thomas understood. and he never once looked at her with pity, only with a quiet rage that someone had hurt her, and a fierce determination that it would never happen again. "I used to think I was weak," Natalie confessed one afternoon in late August. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house, shelling peas for dinner while the other residents were out. "I let him hurt me for so long. I did not fight back." "You survived," Thomas said firmly. "That is not weakness, Natalie. That is strength. You did what you had to do to stay alive until you could get away. And then you did get away. You walked halfway across the country to get free. That takes more courage than most people will ever have." "I set fire to his house," Natalie said suddenly, the confession spilling out before she could stop it. "That is how I escaped. I locked him out and burned the place down so he would think I was dead. I am a murderer." "Did he die?" Thomas asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I do not know. I did not stay to find out." "Then you are not a murderer. You are a woman who did what she had to do to survive an impossible situation." Thomas set down his bowl of peas and turned to face her fully. "Listen to me, Natalie. Whatever you did, whatever you had to do to get free, that was not murder. That was self-defense. You owed that man nothing, least of all your life. The law might not see it that way." "Then the law's wrong," Thomas said flatly. "And if it ever comes to it, if anyone ever tries to take you back, they will have to go through me first." Natalie stared at him, this good man who had somehow appointed himself her protector without asking for anything in return. "You cannot mean that. I have never been more serious about anything in my life." There was something in his eyes when he said it, something intense and almost desperate, and Natalie felt her breath catch. "Thomas," she said softly, and saw him tense at the sound of his name on her lips. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much?" Thomas looked away, his jaw working like he was trying to find the right words. "Because I am falling in love with you," he said finally, so quietly she almost missed it. "I have been falling since the day I caught you in the street. Maybe before that, maybe the moment I saw you stumbling down that dusty road, looking like you would die before you asked for help. I know it is too soon. I know you have been through hell, and the last thing you need is some fool cowboy declaring his feelings. But I cannot keep pretending anymore. I love you, Natalie Harper, and I will wait as long as it takes for you to be ready, but I needed you to know." Natalie's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She should tell him no, should explain that she was too broken for this, that she did not know how to trust anyone after Richard, that falling in love again was the last thing she should be doing. But when she opened her mouth, different words came out. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." Thomas reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and took her hand in his. His thumb traced gentle circles over her palm, carefully avoiding her scarred wrists. "I am not him," he said. "I will never be him. I will never hurt you, never try to control you, never do anything to make you afraid. You have my word on that, Natalie. My solemn word." "I know," Natalie said, and realized she believed it. "I do know that. You have shown me nothing but kindness from the moment we met. It is just difficult to trust my own judgment anymore. I thought I knew Richard, thought he was good, and look how wrong I was." "Then do not trust your judgment," Thomas said. "Trust mine. I am telling you that what I feel for you is real, that I want to court you properly and give you time to heal and show you what love is supposed to look like. Can you trust that?" Natalie looked at their joined hands, at the way his larger one completely engulfed hers, at the scars on her wrists that would never fade. She thought about the past 3 years of hell, about the rope burns and the bruises and the fear. And then she thought about the past month in Montana City, about the way Thomas had never pushed, never demanded, just offered quiet support and let her come to him in her own time. "Yes," she said, "I can trust that." Thomas's smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Thank you," he said. "You will not regret it, Natalie. I promise." They sat on that porch until the sun began to set, talking about everything and nothing, and Natalie felt something unfurl in her chest that she had thought was dead forever. Hope. The possibility of a future that did not involve fear and pain. The chance to be loved by someone who saw her as a person, not a possession. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Natalie had experienced before. Thomas was patient and gentle, always asking permission before touching her, always giving her space when she needed it. He brought her wildflowers picked from the meadows near his ranch. He taught her to ride a horse, spending hours walking beside her until she felt confident enough to trot. He took her to church socials and town gatherings, proud to have her on his arm and quick to shut down anyone who looked at her with judgment or speculation. And slowly, carefully, Natalie began to trust not just Thomas, but herself. She learned that she was stronger than she had known, that she could stand up for what was right without being destroyed. She helped Mrs. Chen organize a fundraiser for the Chinese community after several families had their laundry burned by angry locals. She volunteered at the school, teaching the younger children to read. She made friends and built a life, and discovered that she liked the woman she was becoming. It was October when Thomas asked her to visit his ranch. They rode out on a crisp autumn morning when the leaves were turning gold and the air smelled like smoke and apples. The ranch was beautiful, sprawling acres of grassland backed by mountains, with a sturdy house and well-maintained barns. Thomas introduced her to his brother James, a younger version of himself with the same warm eyes and easy smile, and to the various ranch hands who treated their boss with obvious respect. They spent the day riding the property, Thomas showing her his plans for expansion, the new pastures he wanted to fence, the breeding program he was developing. His passion for the work was evident in every word, and Natalie found herself falling even harder for this man who had built something meaningful out of tragedy and loss. "My parents would have liked you," Thomas said as they sat on a hillside overlooking the ranch, sharing a canteen of water. "My mother especially. She always said I needed to find a woman with backbone, someone who would not let me get away with my nonsense." "And your father?" Natalie asked. "He would have appreciated your courage. He was a big believer in standing up for what was right, even when it cost you." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "I miss them. Every day I miss them. But I think they would be proud of what James and I have done with this place." "I am certain they would be," Natalie said softly. She hesitated, then added, "My parents would have liked you too. They always wanted me to find someone kind. I am sorry you lost them so young. So am I. Maybe if they had lived, I would not have been so desperate for family that I rushed into marriage with the first man who showed interest." Natalie shook her head. "But then again, if I had not married Richard, I would never have come to Montana. I would never have met you. So, perhaps everything happens for a reason." Thomas turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Natalie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Do you think your husband is really dead? Or is there a chance he is out there somewhere, looking for you?" Natalie had been dreading this question, had spent months trying not to think about it. "I do not know," she admitted. "The fire was bad. It destroyed the whole house. But I never saw a body, never had confirmation. So, yes, there is a chance he survived. There is a chance he is looking for me. And if he finds you, if he shows up here, then I will deal with it," Natalie said, more confidently than she felt. "I am not the same woman I was when I left Ohio. I am not afraid anymore." "You should not have to deal with it alone," Thomas said. "If he comes, we face him together. You, me, James, everyone in this town who cares about you. He will not touch you again, Natalie. Not while I am breathing." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Natalie's throat tight with emotion. She reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I love you," she said, the words coming easier now. "I do not think I have said it properly before, but I love you, Thomas Porter. You have given me back something I thought I had lost forever. You have shown me what it means to be cherished instead of controlled." Thomas pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that was warm and safe and completely devoid of threat. Natalie rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart, feeling more at peace than she had in years. "Marry me," Thomas said suddenly, and Natalie pulled back to stare at him in shock. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I know it is fast. I know you are probably not ready, but I do not care. I want you to be my wife, Natalie. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. I want everything, and I want it with you." Natalie's mind was reeling. She had sworn to herself that she would never marry again, that she would never give another man that kind of power over her life. But this was different. Thomas was different. He was not asking to own her, but to partner with her, to build something together based on love and respect instead of fear and control. "I am still married," she said, grasping for objections. "Legally, I am still Richard Harper's wife. Not if he is dead, and if he is alive, we can file for divorce. Montana Territory has some of the most progressive divorce laws in the country. We can make it work, Natalie, if you want to. And if I am not ready, if I need more time, then I will wait," Thomas said simply. "I will wait as long as you need, but I wanted you to know my intentions, wanted you to understand that this is not some passing fancy for me. You are it, Natalie. You are my future, if you will have me." Natalie looked into his eyes, those warm amber eyes that had never looked at her with anything but kindness, and felt the last of her walls crumble. She had been so afraid for so long, so certain that trusting someone again would destroy her. But Thomas had proven over and over that he was worthy of that trust. He had been patient when she needed patience, strong when she needed strength, and gentle always, always gentle. "Yes," she said, and watched his face transform with joy. "Yes, I will marry you. Not right away. I need time to make sure Richard is not coming after me. Need time to feel secure in my freedom. But yes, Thomas, when the time is right, I will be your wife." Thomas kissed her then, a soft press of lips that held more promise than passion, and Natalie felt tears slip down her cheeks. But they were happy tears this time, tears of relief and hope and a love she was finally allowing herself to feel. They set the wedding for the following spring, giving Natalie time to adjust to the idea and to ensure that Richard was truly out of her life. Thomas hired a lawyer to investigate the fire in Ohio and track down any records of Richard's death. The lawyer reported back in November that the house had indeed burned to the ground, but no body had been recovered from the ruins. Richard Harper was missing and presumed dead, but there was no official death certificate. It was not the closure Natalie had hoped for, but it was something. Thomas petitioned the territorial court for a declaration of presumed death based on the evidence, and the judge granted it after a hearing where Natalie had to recount some of what she had endured in her marriage. It was painful and humiliating to speak those truths in open court, but Thomas held her hand through all of it, and the judge was sympathetic. By December, Natalie was legally a widow, free to remarry without fear of legal repercussions. The winter passed quietly. Natalie moved out of the boarding house and into a small cabin on the edge of town that Thomas had purchased and renovated for her. It was her space, her home, somewhere she could be independent, even as she prepared to join her life with his. She continued working for Mrs. Patterson a few days a week, but she also began helping Thomas with the ranch books, discovering that she had a head for numbers and business that neither of them had suspected. They spent long evenings by the fire in her cabin, talking and planning and dreaming about the future. Thomas wanted at least 4 children, he told her with a grin, and Natalie found herself laughing at the thought. A year ago, she could not have imagined wanting children, could not have pictured bringing a baby into a world that had shown her so much cruelty. But with Thomas, she could see it, could picture a house full of laughter and love, children with his amber eyes and her stubborn chin, a family built on everything hers and Richard's had lacked. It was a cold night in February when her past finally caught up with her. Natalie was alone in her cabin, Thomas having ridden back to the ranch earlier that evening, when she heard a knock at the door. She opened it without thinking, expecting maybe Mrs. Patterson or one of the other boarding house women, and found herself face to face with a nightmare. Richard Harper stood on her doorstep, older and thinner than she remembered, but unmistakably alive. His eyes went wide when he saw her, shock and fury warring on his face. "You," he said, and his voice was the same, that horrible voice that had haunted her nightmares for months. "You are alive. They said you died in the fire, but I knew you were too clever for that. I have been searching for you, Natalie. Did you really think you could run from me?" Natalie's first instinct was to slam the door, to run, but she forced herself to stand firm. She was not the same terrified woman who had fled Ohio. She was stronger now, braver, and she would not let Richard see her fear. "How did you find me?" she asked, proud that her voice barely shook. "A man passing through Ohio mentioned a woman matching your description in Montana Territory. It took time to track you down, but here we are. Richard smiled, and it was the smile that used to make her blood run cold. Now you are going to pack your things and come home with me, wife. We have much to discuss. No, Natalie said firmly. I am not going anywhere with you. Our marriage is over, Richard. The courts declared you dead, and I am free of you. Richard's expression darkened. The hell you are? You are my wife until I say different. Now stop this foolishness and get your things. He reached for her, but Natalie jerked back, her hand going to the kitchen knife she had taken to keeping in her pocket. Touch me and I will scream, she warned. This town knows what you did to me. They will not let you take me. This pathetic little town? Richard laughed, cruel and mocking. You think these people care about you? You are nothing. Natalie, you have always been nothing. And once I drag you back home, I am going to make you pay for every day you have been gone, for every moment of worry you caused me. She said no. Both Natalie and Richard whirled to find Thomas standing at the edge of the cabin's porch, and Natalie nearly sobbed with relief. She had not heard him approach, had no idea how long he had been there, but the look on his face was thunderous. Who the hell are you? Richard demanded. Thomas Porter, owner of the Porter Ranch and the man who was going to marry Natalie come spring. Thomas climbed the porch steps slowly, his body tense and ready. Which makes this my problem, you showing up here threatening her. She is my wife, Richard snarled. This is none of your business. She was your wife, Thomas corrected. Past tense. The territorial court declared you legally dead 3 months ago. Far as the law is concerned, your marriage never existed. So, you have got no claim on her, no right to be here, and about 5 seconds to get off this property before I make you. Richard looked between them, his face mottled with rage. You are sleeping with him, he said to Natalie, his voice dripping with disgust. You ran away to play whore with some cowboy. I should have known. Thomas moved so fast Natalie barely saw it. One moment he was standing at the top of the steps, the next he had Richard by the throat, slamming him back against the porch railing hard enough to make the wood creak. You are going to apologize to her, Thomas said, his voice deadly quiet. Right now? Or, I am going to throw you off this porch and you are going to find out how we deal with men who hurt women in Montana territory. Richard gurgled something that might have been an apology, his hands scrabbling at Thomas's grip. Thomas held him for another moment, then released him with a shove that sent Richard stumbling. He caught himself on the railing, gasping for air, his eyes full of impotent fury. Get out of Montana City, Thomas said. Tonight. And if I ever hear that you have come within 100 miles of Natalie again, if you so much as send her a letter, I will hunt you down and make you regret the day you were born. We clear? Richard straightened his coat with shaking hands, trying to salvage some dignity. This is not over, he said, but there was no conviction in it. He looked at Natalie one last time, something almost like regret flickering in his eyes, and then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness. Natalie's knees buckled and Thomas caught her, pulling her tight against his chest, as she finally let herself shake apart. It's all right, he murmured into her hair. He is gone. You are safe. I have got you. How did you know to come back? Natalie asked when she could finally speak. I do not know, Thomas admitted. I got halfway home and just had this feeling that something was wrong. So I turned around and came back. Thank God I did. They stood there on the porch for a long time, holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead. Eventually, Thomas led her inside and built up the fire, made her tea with shaking hands, sat beside her on the small sofa, and let her cry herself out. He found me, Natalie said when the tears finally stopped. I was so careful, but he found me anyway. And now he is gone, Thomas said firmly. He is a coward, Natalie. He preys on women because they are the only people he can dominate. But faced with someone his own size who was willing to fight back, he ran. He will not come back here. He knows he is not welcome. You do not know that. He could come back with a gun, could hurt you or James or anyone else in this town. Then we will be ready for him, Thomas said. Tomorrow I'm going to talk to the sheriff, make sure he knows Richard was here and what the situation is. We will make sure everyone is watching out for you. And I'm going to start sleeping here, in your cabin, just until we are sure the danger has passed. Thomas, you do not have to do that. Yes, I do. Natalie, I am not going to leave you alone and vulnerable when that man could come back. Please, let me stay. Let me protect you. Natalie looked at him, at this good man who had given her back her life, and nodded. All right. Thank you. True to his word, Thomas moved into the cabin that night. He slept on the sofa, giving Natalie the bedroom, and she lay awake listening to his steady breathing and feeling safer than she had since Richard appeared. Days passed and there was no sign of Richard Harper. The sheriff sent deputies to search the area, but found no trace of him. It seemed he had taken Thomas's threat to heart and left Montana territory entirely. As winter gave way to early spring, Natalie began to believe that maybe, finally, she was truly free. The nightmares that had plagued her for months grew less frequent. She laughed more easily, smiled more often, began to truly envision the future she and Thomas were building together. They were married on a bright April morning in the little white church on Main Street. Natalie wore a dress of pale blue silk that Sarah and the other boarding house women had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that Thomas had picked himself that morning. Mrs. Patterson cried through the entire ceremony, and James stood as Thomas's best man with a grin that would not quit. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Thomas kissed her, Natalie felt something settle into place in her chest. She was no longer running, no longer afraid. She was Natalie Porter now, wife to a good man, member of a community that had embraced her, builder of a new life that was entirely her own. The reception was held at the boarding house, with half the town turning out to celebrate. There was music and dancing, more food than any group could possibly eat, and toast after toast, wishing the newlyweds happiness and prosperity. Natalie danced until her feet ached, laughed until her sides hurt, and felt more alive than she could ever remember being. That night, Thomas carried her over the threshold of the ranch house that was now their home. James had moved to the foreman's cabin to give them privacy, and the house was quiet and warm and welcoming. Thomas set Natalie down gently in the bedroom and pulled her into his arms. "I love you," he said, the words soft against her temple. "I will love you every day for the rest of my life, Natalie Porter." "And I love you," Natalie replied, rising on her toes to kiss him properly. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for showing me what love is supposed to be." "The honor has been mine," Thomas said. Then he kissed her again, deep and slow, and Natalie let herself fall into it, secure in the knowledge that she was finally, truly home. The years that followed were full and happy in ways Natalie had never dreamed possible. She threw herself into ranch life, learning to manage the accounts and help Thomas make decisions about breeding and expansion. She made friends among the other ranchers' wives, hosted dinners and quilting bees, became a fixture at church and town gatherings, and slowly, carefully, she healed from the wounds Richard had left on her soul. Their first child was born in the spring of 1880, a son they named William, after Thomas's father. He had his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn determination, and Natalie loved him with a fierceness that sometimes frightened her. A daughter followed 2 years later, Grace, with dark curls and a laugh that could light up a room, and then another son, Samuel, in 1884, completing their family. Natalie never heard from Richard Harper again. As the years passed, she stopped looking over her shoulder, stopped expecting him to appear and destroy everything she had built. She learned to trust that she was safe, that the life she had created was solid and real, and no one could take it from her. Thomas was everything she had hoped for and more. He was patient with her lingering fears, understanding when nightmares made her wake screaming, gentle always, but especially when she needed gentleness most. He encouraged her independence, supported her ideas for the ranch, treated her as a full partner in everything they did. And he loved her, steadily and surely, day after day, year after year, until Natalie could no longer remember what it felt like to be unloved. On their 10th anniversary, they stood on the same hillside where Thomas had first proposed, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. The children were with James and his new wife back at the ranch house, and it was just the two of them, holding hands like they had all those years ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked. "Coming to Montana? Marrying me?" Natalie turned to look at him, this man who had saved her in every way that mattered, and smiled. "Never, not for a single moment. You gave me my life back, Thomas. You showed me I could be strong and loved at the same time. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to keep going when I thought I had nothing left. How could I ever regret that?" Thomas pulled her close, and Natalie rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. The scars on her wrists had faded to thin white lines, barely visible now, and she rarely thought about them anymore. They were part of her history, a reminder of what she had survived, but they did not define her. What defined her was this: the ranch she had helped build, the children she had raised, the man she loved and who loved her in return. She was Natalie Porter, survivor and fighter, wife and mother, and she was finally, completely free. Years continued to roll by like the seasons, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. William grew into a strong young man who shared his father's passion for ranching, taking on more responsibility with each passing year. Grace became a teacher at the Montana City School, following in Miss Williams' footsteps and bringing the same fierce determination her mother had shown to ensuring every child in town could read and write. Samuel, the youngest, surprised everyone by developing a talent for business, helping Thomas expand the ranch's operations into cattle shipping and eventually into land investment. Natalie watched her children grow with a pride that never diminished. She taught them to be kind but strong, to stand up for what was right, to never let anyone make them feel small or powerless. And when they asked about the scars on her wrists, which they inevitably did as they got older, she told them the truth. Not all of it, not the worst parts, but enough that they understood their mother had survived something terrible and come out stronger on the other side. The ranch prospered under Thomas and Natalie's joint leadership. They expanded their holdings, bought neighboring properties as they became available, and the Porter Ranch became one of the most successful operations in Montana territory. When Montana achieved statehood in 1889, Thomas was asked to serve in the state legislature, but he declined, saying his place was with his family and his land. Natalie secretly thought he had made the right choice. James married a sweet-natured woman named Catherine, who had come west with a wagon train, and they had 4 children of their own. The two families lived close, their children growing up together more like siblings than cousins, and Sunday dinners at the ranch house became a boisterous, joyful tradition that Natalie treasured. Mrs. Patterson retired from running the boarding house in 1892, selling it to one of the former residents and moving to California to live with her daughter. But before she left, she took Natalie aside and squeezed her hands tightly. "I am so proud of you," the older woman said, her eyes bright with tears. "That first day Thomas brought you to my door, you looked like a strong wind would blow you over. And look at you now. You are a force of nature, Natalie Porter. You have built something beautiful here." "I could not have done it without you," Natalie said, her own voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a chance when I had nothing. You believed in me. I will never forget that." They embraced, and Natalie cried as she watched Mrs. Patterson's coach disappear down the road, taking with it one of the first true friends she had made in Montana. As Natalie entered her 40s and then her 50s, she found herself becoming something of a matriarch in Montana City. Women who were fleeing bad situations, who needed help or shelter or just someone to believe them, found their way to her door. Natalie welcomed them all, offering what assistance she could, connecting them with resources, and sometimes just listening while they told stories she understood all too well. She and Thomas opened a women's shelter in town, funding it themselves and recruiting volunteers to staff it. It was not much, but it was something, and Natalie took fierce satisfaction in knowing she was helping others find the freedom she had found. Thomas aged gracefully, his dark hair going silver, his face gaining lines that only made him more handsome. He was as devoted to Natalie at 60 as he had been at 28, still bringing her wildflowers from the meadow, still holding her hand as they watched the sunset, still telling her he loved her every single day. Their physical passion had mellowed with time into something deeper and more sustaining, a comfort and companionship that needed no words. William took over most of the day-to-day ranch operations by the time Thomas turned 65, and Thomas finally allowed himself to slow down. He and Natalie traveled some, visiting California and even making the long journey back east to see where Natalie had grown up. Standing in front of the empty lot where Richard's house had stood, now overgrown with weeds and long forgotten by the neighbors, Natalie felt nothing. No fear, no anger, just a distant sense that this place and this past belonged to someone else entirely. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked, his hand warm in hers. "Yes," Natalie said, and meant it. "I think I needed to see this, to know it was really over. And now I have. Let us go home." They returned to Montana, to the ranch and the family and the life they had built together, and Natalie never looked back again. On a warm summer evening in 1905, Natalie and Thomas sat on the porch of the ranch house, surrounded by children and grandchildren, gathered for William's oldest son's birthday celebration. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the sound of laughter filled the air. Natalie leaned against Thomas's shoulder, his arm around her waist, and felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked softly. "How lucky I am," Natalie said. "That day I stumbled into Montana City, I thought my life was over. I thought I would spend whatever time I had left just surviving, just getting through each day. I never imagined all of this. The family, the home, the love. You gave me all of that, Thomas." "We gave it to each other," Thomas corrected gently. "I was just a rancher, Natalie. Content enough, but not complete. You made me complete. You made me better. And you gave me a family and a life I could never have imagined either." Grace called out that it was time to cut the cake, and their grandchildren came running, clamoring for attention. Natalie laughed and let herself be pulled into the chaos, Thomas right beside her, and thought about the woman she had been 27 years ago. That frightened, broken woman with rope burns on her wrists would never have believed this future was possible. But it was. She had made it possible by refusing to give up, by finding the courage to run, by opening her heart to love one more time, even when every instinct screamed that it was dangerous. The scars on her wrists were still there, faded but permanent, a reminder of where she had been. But they were also a reminder of where she had come from, of what she had survived, of the strength she had found when she needed it most. They were part of her story, but they were not the whole story. The whole story was here, in this moment, surrounded by the family she had created and the man who had loved her through it all. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Natalie and Thomas lay in their bed and watched the moonlight stream through the window. Thomas's fingers traced gentle patterns on her arm, and Natalie felt herself drifting towards sleep, safe and warm and loved. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Thomas asked. "For everything. For catching me when I fell. For bandaging my wrists and not asking why. For being patient. For loving me. For all of it." Thomas pressed a kiss to her temple. "It has been my honor, Natalie Porter. My greatest honor." Natalie smiled and let her eyes close, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would bring another day in this life she had built. Another day of love and family and the quiet joy of simply being. She had survived the worst that life could throw at her, and she had not just survived, but thrived. The rope burns had healed long ago, but even if the scars remained forever, they would only serve as proof of her strength, her resilience, her refusal to be broken. She was loved, she was safe, she was home, and that, Natalie thought as sleep finally claimed her, was the best possible ending to her story.